Gehed mi hafolcha. Welcome everyone. This is another webinar of Mind the Crack, your online life hacks, where we discuss life improvement tools based on the works of L. Ron Hubbard. So today's topic, as we are continuing on with the short series on relationships, is Salvage Your Relationship. That's our title today. Before we get started on that, just want to introduce all of you that are watching on the different platforms, how you can get in contact with me. We are doing this as a webinar with the idea that you can engage, ask questions. If something is not clear for you, definitely ask about that. And also share. Looking at the information that I give you, I would like you to consider that information in light of your own experience. And then taking that new information and looking how that could actually fit into your life, or how you could use it, how you could apply it to yourself, is how you're going to get the most out of this webinar. Okay, so I'm here live on a Zoom chat. I've already said a hello and welcome to everyone there. But if you are following along on any of the other platforms and social media, whether it be Instagram, YouTube, or one of our Facebook lines, you can pop into the comments section there, anything that you like, comments or questions, or if you want to share a story. And there is not just myself here in the Zoom webinar, I also have another host following along on the other platforms there, and they will relay to me here on the Zoom chat whatever is put in on the other platforms. Okay, so now that that introduction is done, you can give me some thumbs up or some waves, things like that, just to let me know that you are attentive and ready to go. One extra thing before we start on the content is, what do I have to do with this subject? Well, I have been dealing with people on a one-on-one basis for close enough to 2 decades, and I have seen all aspects, emotional, health-related, all parts of a relationship, and how an individual person and their own relationships, whether it be with their direct partner, whether it be with their family, or their extended friends, colleagues, and things like that, all the different ways that they interact and relate to them, and the types of problems that they have, the common sources of those problems and where they stem from. And through helping the many thousands of people in this way, there are a number of principles that are basically contained in this book, which is called Scientology, The Fundamentals of Thought. This book by L. Ron Hubbard covers the basic principles of Scientology, and by just having the information that is in this book and applying it to your life in regard to relationships and how to start them, how to grow them, or in this case we're looking at how to salvage them, this book contains a lot of, if not all of, the answers to the questions that I have had people give to me about their relationships over time. So, considering that as an introduction to this book, let's get on with this topic. So, salvaging your relationship. Before we get into looking at the salvage part, what I would say is complications in any relationship quite often are actually there at the outset. And what I mean by that is that when two people come together, doesn't matter what the relationship is, the circumstances under which they come together, if there are any flaws, any errors, or any mistakes in that relationship at the onset, usually those things get carried on through the relationship until they surface as a larger problem. So one of the best things that I would suggest for anyone that's looking at, maybe they've finished a relationship and they don't want to salvage it, if that's not for you, this topic on how to salvage a relationship, is look at how to start, how to choose a partner, and how to start a healthy relationship, and how to grow a relationship if it has started, to repair these things, these small errors that may have been there at the outset, so that you don't run into them as larger problems later on. Okay, so that's the preface to this, is that the complications begin from the outset, and those complications grow into huge things. And that brings me to the point of salvage. So what does salvage mean? Well, salvage means to save from ruin. So there has to be some sort of ruin to have occurred for a salvage to be warranted, to be needed. And when I say ruin, we're talking about something that is wrong, something that both people agree is wrong, or at least one person within a relationship says is wrong or believes is wrong. And when you have something wrong that needs to be repaired, or something has been ruined and it needs to be fixed, that's when salvage is necessary. So, next step, what is a relationship? Well, a relationship is two entities, two groups. Now, it could be a business and another business, but in particular we're talking about interpersonal relationships here, so a person and another person. Well, they come together and they join in activity for some reason. So there's been some purpose for them to join. And the purpose for them to join is some sort of activity or an endeavor, some sort of a game, something that involves both of them, and they've joined for that purpose. We will say that that activity, having joined together and having a purpose, it wants to do well. It wants to survive. And if you've been watching some of the other webinars, you will understand the concept of survive, but to go over it briefly, is that if we look across all of life, the lowest common denominator of existence is this concept of survival. A plant is trying to survive, an animal is trying to survive, a human is trying to survive, and even a group of humans, like in maybe a football team, some sort of sports team or a business, it is trying to survive, to continue going on existing, and then of course to exist or survive at higher and higher levels of abundance or activity, in other words, expanding. Okay, so all aspects of life, plants, animals, the physical universe, humans, families, groups, the entire species of mankind, all trying to survive. So in a relationship, it is brought together between two people with the purpose to achieve something and to do it well or to survive by doing so. And if we look at what it is as the most basic, aside from survive, the next most basic concept that a relationship is aiming towards is creating an effect. Now this will become a bit clearer in a moment, but let me go over it this way. So there is a purpose, and that purpose is to do something. And of course there are constraints to any sort of directed endeavor. There are barriers and there are things that can be done. So freedoms and barriers and purposes. And these three factors are the anatomy of a game, which again, L. Ron Hubbard goes over in detail in this book. So there's a purpose. And in achieving that purpose, or going about achieving that purpose, effects are desired to be created. Because when you're creating an effect, you're creating something and making it go out into the world and having some effect on other things, then that is an expression of survival. So, remember I spoke before about this whole idea of problems being there at the outset? Well, look at it from that viewpoint now of purpose, of creating an effect, and of survival. So consider these things. What is the purpose of the relationship that you entered into? Is it one of simply there for pleasure, sensation, or is it a relationship that has come together that's simply convenience of companionship? Maybe it is put together because similar interests are shared. All of these different types of reasons or for a relationship coming together have to go into a purpose. And even if it is something out of convenience or it's something because it was pleasurable and it doesn't have any greater depth than that, then there is always purpose created within that. And what I have definitely seen over time is that if two people come together in a relationship and there is some sort of convenience or there is some sort of pleasure associated with it, but there isn't really anything deeper on this creating an effect to survive better kind of line. If that purpose to create bigger effects and to survive while creating those effects or have improved survival, if that's not there, then generally after a time, at least one person in the relationship will start to develop or come around to the point where they want to create their own effects. So surviving and the desire to create effects are very, very basic and strong impulses in a human being, that if a relationship doesn't bring that, to that person, then that person will tend to go and look for it on their own. So, again, these are kind of preliminary grounding points of a relationship to see how you start a good relationship and how you build it up. And the reason that I'm bringing it up is simply because they have context with regard to when a relationship goes south and is in some sort of ruin. Okay, so hopefully you've got all that. If there's any questions at all, please put them in there. I can go over any parts of that again. Okay, so we've got to this point of establishing that there is a purpose in a relationship, and both parties of that relationship are having that purpose, creating effects, and surviving better and better through that relationship. And that's where any good relationship will be headed and will be going. So, when there is a ruin, what happens? And this is my personal observation, and I have seen this many times with many people, is that there is a ratio, and we could use some terms that are used in this book, but we'll say positive and negative, kind of like advantages and disadvantages, or the proportion or the ratio of survival and the proportion of the ratio of succumb. So in any relationship, usually they form, they bloom, they blossom, they are strengthened, they develop, and this whole process of a relationship growing is developing more time, more memories, more activity that is positive, that is survival, that is the pros, that is the advantages of that relationship. Now when things start to go wrong, maybe it's even tiny little mistakes are made, maybe there are very small transgressions, maybe there are, you forgot to buy milk when you were down the street. That even that tiny little mistake, it adds to the disadvantages of the relationship. It adds to if we've got the pros, it adds to the cons. If we've got the survival, it adds to the succumb or the contra survival activities. And as a relationship is progressing towards ruin and therefore needs salvaging, I have generally seen that the longer a relationship goes on, or the greater amount of positive experience in that relationship, in order for a relationship requiring salvage to occur, there needs to be a similar magnitude of negative, let's say, activity or experience in order to then call that relationship in doubt or being in need of salvage. So hopefully that concept makes sense, and I'll give it to you in another way. So, two people have been together for a long period of time, lots of positive activities, they've been on holidays, they've had great experiences, perhaps they've grown a greater group of friends, or they've grown their family and they've added to their family, and it's all been very positive, and goals have been achieved towards the creation of activity from that relationship. Now, there can be a long period of time, maybe that took 10 years, there can be a very gradual subtraction from that positive experience, a very gradual addition and addition and addition of negative activity, of negative experience, forgot this, didn't remember relationship, anniversary milestones, didn't do this, forgot that, lied about this, didn't tell the truth about this. And eventually, if this collection of experience, of negative experience, gets as big as that collection of positive experience, then you can start to see that the relationship starts to become, well, why am I doing this? Am I trying to survive, or am I trying to, lose in life? And that's when that question will come about, should I really be in this relationship? But notwithstanding that, it can also happen in this way. Relationship of 10 years, additions to the family, successes, promotions, activities in life that have been fun, pleasurable, forming new bonds socially, etc., etc. So we've got a big magnitude of that. And then we can have something like a single short experience that can be so devastating, perhaps something like a transgression against that relationship, like someone could have an affair, or someone could do something mortally physically harming against the person they're in a relationship with. And just that one single experience has enough magnitude to warrant doubting the survival value of that relationship continuing. All right, so you've got those two concepts. Is that the volume of experience that is positive versus the volume of experience that is negative, whether it be over a long period of time or very intense in a short period of time. When the negative starts to outweigh the positive, then we start to get into a, we need a salvage kind of situation occurring because this relationship is headed toward ruin. So, now you'll see how these two factors of the positive and negative relate to the outset of the relationship. And so to bring that back in this way, what I'm talking about is what is the purpose of that relationship? And we get to this thing called a problem. The problem occurs that there's an intention to have the relationship continue, and against that intention to have the relationship continue, there is an intention to have that relationship discontinue, which is that what I was talking about, that positive versus negative activity. So when they match each other and both intentions to continue and to discontinue the relationship, when they meet each other, then the person has a problem. What do I do? Do I break up with them? Do I stay with them? Where does that actually go? Okay, so this whole anatomy of a problem, we would call it, which again is contained in this book in much more detail, of having these intentions, you can see how that, and this is what I was relating to that point of how the relationship started. If there's no purpose, if there's no intention behind this positive activity, and it's not headed in a certain direction, then where is it going? And any negative activity that works against that relationship, well, it's quite clear where it's going out of the relationship. So when you have two intentions going in different directions, you don't have agreement. And when you have that sort of a problem, then you are starting to ask yourself, well, what is good and what is bad? And that's basically where you end up. Okay, so moving on from there. So let's say something has occurred that has tipped the scales to the point where there has been more negative experience than there has been positive experience, and it is desired that the relationship should be ended, and therefore it is in ruin and it does need salvaging. What do you do from there? Okay, now we're at the first point. So, one of the first things, of course, is that if agreements were made or purposes did exist at the beginning that have now become trashed or they've been violated in some way, then new agreements need to be made. And if you've been watching previous webinars, you'll remember we talk about the ARC triangle, which was a discovery that L. Ron Hubbard made in a relationship between three things: affinity, A, reality, R, and C, communication, ARC, also called the ARC triangle. And R stands for reality, which has to do with agreement. The agreement upon things which are real that you can see around you, and also agreements between people. Now, if agreements came into effect at the beginning of the relationship and then they have been violated, then the only way to move forward is to repair those agreements. So how do you do that? Well, the ARC triangle gives us the answer again, because the C in that triangle is the most important point. And it is from communication that you can establish a reality or an agreement. So, no matter how it is, if you have violated agreements, if whatever positive experience has existed in the relationship, if the negative experience has gotten so large that you've been told, that's it, we're not doing this relationship anymore, I'm not in agreement with the relationship, then the first step is for you to use communication to establish new agreement. And then the second secret from that ARC triangle is this point of affinity. Affinity is the degree of likingness, or the level of emotion, from negative emotions all the way up through positive emotions. And affinity also has to do with tolerance of distance. Something that you have a great affinity for, you want it to be very close to you. Something you have a very low affinity for, you want it to be further away from you, as an example. Again, the full details of this ARC triangle included in this book. So, having been in need of salvage in a relationship, new agreements have to be made. Okay, what were the old agreements? Do they make sense? Are you able to make new agreements? Are the things that need to be agreed to not what you want to agree to? So with communication at a high level of affinity, showing and expressing care, showing and expressing the desire to want the other person to survive well, using that in communication to establish new realities and agreements, that has to be done as a very, very first point. Because if there are no agreements, then what chance or what possibility have you got of being able to go forward with the same intention or with the same purpose? So you can see how it takes care of that. Now the next thing, I actually have also covered in a previous webinar on communication. And what we were looking at in that webinar is that if you have had a misunderstanding of some sort in communication, well, the same thing happens with a misunderstanding or an error or a mistake or some sort of ruin type experience in a relationship, is that the truth is always the best path to establish proper communication and reality. So if you are the one that has made a mistake, then absolutely the best thing to do is to come clean and say, this is what happened, this is what I was thinking, this is why I did it, and this was the result, and this is what happened. Now, just by acknowledging the truth of what was done that perhaps ruined a relationship can quite often be sufficient for the other person, who usually cares for you dearly actually before you made that mistake, for that person to understand why it was that, why you did what was done, or at least get the full information on it. And just that on its own, and that full, no back off, complete detail, giving that information to the other person does two things. It relieves you fully and completely of not having to withhold or hide anything further from that person, which is very open in communication and will only help with your agreements and going forward. And it'll also help that person have a full reality and understanding of what it is that goes through your mind, or what things you're experiencing in life and how you're trying to deal with problems. Because if they really, really care for you and you're solving problems really, really in a crap way, then they will care for you to the degree where they will say, I see, you made this choice and you made this mistake and you didn't know how to handle it, so this is what happened. Well, here's what I would suggest. This is the way that you could handle that situation in the future. And if that person on the other end, the receiving end of your mistake, actually cares for you, then what they will do is they will want to help correct you. They will want to help improve you. So that's what giving the absolute truth of perhaps some negative experience in the relationship, maybe one that you caused, well, this is definitely what we're talking about, one that you caused, giving that full reality across will actually help in those two ways. Okay, so the second point is, and you need to be wary of one thing here. If you have made a mistake and you're the cause for the relationship being in need of salvage, you need to, of course, watch for the other person really wanting to exaggerate this, what I'll call justifiable grievance. So you've upset them, you've done something wrong, and that person on the receiving end of that takes it way over the top in terms of demands, complaints, or insistencies upon certain things to make up the damage. Is that if that other person is really blowing this out of proportion, then you also need to then take a look at, do you still want to be in that relationship? Is that person that's on the other end of that communication, when you're trying to make up for the damage that was caused or make up for the ruin, do they have your survival to heart? Or are they just trying to now take from you because they don't view you as a companion in survival, but rather something that they can leech survival from? Now, of course, there are many different colors of problems and situations that you can create, and that then brings me to the second point. You also do have to do something to make up the damage. Okay? It's not just a matter of, oh, okay, well, I messed up and, I cheated with this other person and I had an affair and, I'm really sorry and this is exactly what happened and all this sort of thing. And yet, listen, I'd really like to get back with you, but that's actually what happened. Do you feel better now? Well, that sort of an explanation, very empty-handed with no action that follows up to make the damage up, or to show that you are actually part of that team and not part of some other team, making up the damage also has to be done. And it has to be in many ways offered from you to the other person, not necessarily, well, what do you need me to do? Because that in itself, when you're asking the other person what you need, which is actually quite a good, it is far better when you originate what things that you can do and looking for approval from that person. Okay, so just in that second point, I want to make sure that you're clear with that. Making sure that if you have caused some ruin, that you're getting a person to, well, let's go back and we'll just say one point at a time. So the first step is acknowledging and getting out and communicating everything that actually happened. Whether it be many small things or whether it be a large thing, expressing for you what was your problem, what you tried to do, what you were thinking, and how it ended up, that sort of stuff. Communicating that is the first point, communicating everything. The second point is then saying, good, I still want to be with you, let's make new agreements. And the agreements that we would make is that I'm going to make up the damage first of all, and then these are our new agreements. So in that part, being wary of that person expanding or blowing out of proportion the things that they want you to do or make up for as a result of the damage you did. Now, you're going to have to make up some sort of damage, but you need to watch out for that, because you need to question for yourself, is that person really wanting me to survive with them in a partnership, or are they just looking to leech things from me after the fact that I made this mistake? And do they really, therefore, did they really have that relationship with best interests at heart or not? So anyway, communication is the overall concept of those two things, and communicating as much as possible. Now, when it comes to making up the damage, we start to get into an area which is covered by, L. Ron Hubbard found that life exists in various conditions. And each of these conditions, they flow one to the next, and they go from low levels of existence to very high levels of abundance and strong survival. Now, these conditions are quite a lot to go through, and I'm not going to go through them today, but we are going to touch on them in a future webinar. But what they outline for you is that they break down your activity, any activity, doesn't matter what it is, into a description of what it's doing, a description of what state it's in, and the key part is a formula for how to get yourself out of that situation. Okay? And there are many different levels. So this relates to making up the damage. So first of all, you need to work for the damage to be worked out. So the damage to be made up, you need to work out what condition am I in? How much damage did I actually cause to the relationship? And what do I therefore need to put back into it off my own back, out of my own origination, out of my own activity? What do I need to put back to make that negative, that positive and negative, tip into the balance of the positive again, with new agreements and things like that. So this whole idea of conditions and how you would apply ethics, which is what we'll call the personal morals that someone applies to themselves, how conditions relate to that is another aspect, but it goes along with that point of making up the damage, making agreements, and making sure that they stand firm. Okay, so beyond that, salvaging a relationship. Something has gone wrong, communicating what went wrong. Talking about the agreements. Making up the damage if it was part of your problem or your situation that made the damage, right? And then, of course, you need to then get aligned with those agreements. And one of the tools that you can use is to sit down with your partner and actually create the future. And of course, putting thoughts and minds toward the future are definitely very, very strong types of thoughts and activities. Talking about the past only dips you into your mind, and all sorts of conflated, mixed up experiences can certainly come in there, but the future hasn't been touched yet. And putting someone's mind into the future, if it is your partner or someone you're in a relationship with, and being creative on that point, and talking about what could be and what can be done, actually starts to take advantage of that positive experience that you've actually had. The more positive experience that can be created into the future makes a salvage possible, because it starts to show the person, okay, we had a problem, there was mistakes, the disadvantages of the relationship started to outweigh the advantages, but in the future, with new agreements made, with me showing how I could make up the damage, that our future could be very, very bright. And future will only be seen to be very, very bright if you're putting it towards some purpose that helps survive and that actually assists in creating effects aligned with what each person wants from that relationship and for themselves in life. Okay, so I hit you with quite a lot there, and I hope you got that. If there are any questions and comments on what I have covered so far, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check in with the host on the other platforms. Her name is Michelle. So I'm going to type in a message here. Good. So this whole aspect of salvaging, you can see that there are quite a number of parts or aspects to it. Some of these things we have covered in the previous webinar on repairing misunderstandings. Some of these things we're going to cover a little bit more in future webinars on setting targets and goals. That will work out with setting targets and goals with your group or your partner in that way. Okay, good. So I don't have any questions on any other platforms, which is totally fine. And here on Zoom, I'm quite clear as well. So I'm not going to end with anything else other than to say the basic principles in Scientology that are gone over in this book and expanded on what I've said today, they are applicable to your life. And if you use them and apply them to your life, and sometimes it takes a little bit of working out how you're going to apply them, you might find the exact answer to what it is that you are dealing with in your relationship that may be in need of salvage. So, in regard to this book, if you want to pick up a copy of that, Michelle will put a link into the Zoom chat here, and she will also put a link into each of the platforms that you may be following on from, so you can get a hold of that book. Basically, that is it that I have for today. Questions or otherwise, please put them in comments afterwards. I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to engage a little bit more in some of these webinars and find out what else you would like to know. Otherwise, pick up a copy of that book, and I will see you on the next webinar. Sinead for today.